Hello, good evening, everyone. Today, we will go ahead and discuss what is Phase 2 DEPR all about. What should be your strategy for Phase 2? What are the books that you should be referring to? And how should you be writing answers in RBI DEPR Phase 2 exam? So today we will be going ahead and doing a thorough analysis of RBI DEPR Phase 2 paper. Okay, beta. To begin with, let us go ahead and let us talk about what is Phase 2. So when I talk about RBI paper, the paper DEPR paper is divided in two parts, Phase 1 and Phase 2. Only the students, after you have given Phase 1, and Phase 1 has English also in it, and Phase 1 has objective questions in it. So only after you have given Phase 1 beta, you sit for Phase 2 paper. ठीक है? अब क्वेश्चन है कि Phase 2 में exactly क्या आता है और कैसे prepare करना है. So Phase 2 has two papers in it. One is called paper 1 and other is called paper 2. So Phase 2 can be divided in two parts. पेपर 1 and पेपर 2. दोनों ही जो पेपर्स हैं, they come for 120 minutes each. 120 minutes means you have 2 hours each for paper 1 and paper 2 respectively. And these papers are going to be there for 100 marks each. ठीक है? These papers, beta, they are going to be written paper. So what do I mean by written paper? By written paper, I mean that you will be given question paper on the computer and you have to write the answer on paper. Okay? So you will be given computerized questions. Computer pe question dikhenge, but answer must be written on sheets. So answer have to be written on paper. Okay? Let us go ahead and start our discussion with paper 1. When I talk about paper 1 is divided in two modules. So paper 1 के अपने आप में दो modules हैं, module 1 and module 2. Module 1 is microeconomic models and module 2 is macroeconomic models. So paper 1 consists of microeconomics and macroeconomics. दो modules रहेंगे इसके अंदर, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Each of this module, it is going to be equal weightage. तो दोनों की ही weightage equal रहेगी. मतलब 100 marks का microeconomics रहेगा and 100 marks का macroeconomics रहेगा. So each of this paper is going to go ahead and carry equal weightage. Better start by understanding what is module 1. So when we talk about module 1, that is microeconomics, we have multiple topics in microeconomics. Microeconomics के अंदर ही अलग-अलग topics हैं. The first topic that we have, that is called consumer theory. Right? Now, what will they ask exactly in consumer theory? So when we talk about consumer theory, you will have cardinality approach. Cardinality approach matlab ki the approach which is around the numbers. है ना? Cardinal approach क्या होती है? Where you talk about utilities, marginal utilities. So the approach which talks about marginal utilities, which talks about marginal utility of income, right? Which talks about law of diminishing marginal utility. ये जो भी number से related approach रहेगी, that is your cardinality approach. The second thing that you will be asked will be beta ordinality approach. So when I talk about ordinality approach, we know that ordinality approach is around the ranking. So when I talk about ranking, we know that ranking means automatically indifference curves. ठीक है. So ordinality approach and cardinality approach, both of them are important. In fact, you know, as a reference, I have posted a question on YouTube which talks about the difference between cardinal and ordinal approach. इसकी बात की है मैंने उसमें कि इनके बीच का क्या difference है. And I've also talked about the similarity between the two, कि किस terms में ये दोनों similar है. And I've also talked about why ordinal approach is better. Ordinal is better. So I've talked about all these three things. What is the difference between cardinal and ordinal? इस पे मैंने पूरा आंसर लिखवाया हुआ है. You can go through it. What is the similarity between the two and why ordinal is better than cardinal? So questions like this can go ahead and come in your exam also. Now, but the next thing that can come is consumer surplus. Now, when I talk about consumer surplus, you should know how to not only calculate consumer surplus, but you should be well aware of calculating the deadweight loss also. Right? And you should be well aware of how different schemes affect consumer surplus, producer surplus, and deadweight loss. Like, for example, how price ceiling, price floor, taxation, etc. How do these affect consumer surplus? इनसे consumer surplus कैसे affect होता है, ये भी समझ में आना चाहिए. Clear है? But our next question, next topic that arises, that is your indifference curve approach. Now, when I talk about indifference curve approach, let me create some space again. So, beta, indifference curve approach में क्या क्या पूछा जा सकता है? The basic questions. What are ICs? But you should be well aware of the different kind of ICs. Like, for example, convex, concave ICs. Then you should be aware of sorry, max function, min function, substitute codes, composite functions. You should be aware of the bliss point. And all of this, you should be aware of that. So again, let me give you an example here. So supposedly, I give you a function like this, minus x minus 10 whole square minus y minus 10 whole square. Suppose this is your utility function. Then you should know that where is your equilibrium. So questions like this, that when you are given a utility function, where exactly is your equilibrium for this utility function, you should be aware of that also. Clear? Come to the next point, beta. Price offer curve and income offer curve. So when I talk about price offer curve, not only price offer curve, but you should be aware about Slutsky equation. What is price effect? How is that divided into substitution effect and income effect? Okay. You should be aware of the demand curve. Why it is upward sloping for given goods. Okay. You should be aware that the demand curve is downward sloping for normal and inferior goods. So you must be aware of these concepts also. Price offer में सिर्फ price offer की definition नहीं, ये सब भी जाना equally important है. Similarly, beta, when I talk about the income offer curve, so you should be well aware about the angel curve also. Okay. Again, you should know why you have backward bending income offer curve for inferior goods. So you should be aware of this also. Okay. But next comes game theory. So game theory is, according to me, not a topic जो आपका consumer theory में लिखा जाना चाहिए, but still game theory में you should be aware about, let me again create some space. So game theory में you should be aware about simultaneous games. You should be aware about sequential games. You should be aware about mixed games. You should be aware about 3-player games. You should be aware about the infinite games. So you should be aware about all these concepts also when it comes to game theory. So game theory is the next topic that you have to cover. So beta, when again ek bari dekh lete, when it comes to consumer theory, you should be aware about cardinal approach, about ordinal approach, about consumer surplus, about indifference curve, about price offer curve, about income offer curve, and about game theory. Clear ho gaya? Now let us go ahead to the next topic. The next topic is producer theory. Okay. So in producer theory, you should be aware about the different forms of production function. So again, we know that there are multiple forms of production functions that I have. So what are the different forms of production function that you have? Again, beta, we can have Leontief, we can have Cobb-Douglas, right? We can have substitutes, etc. So you should be aware about all the forms of production function. अब यहाँ ऐसे specifically लिखा नहीं है, but when we talk about production function, production theory as a whole पता होनी चाहिए. So you should be well aware of what is elasticity of substitution. Right? You should be aware about elasticity of substitution. You should be well aware about the cost theories. Right? So when it talks about this, you should ideally be aware about all the things. Production maybe and cost maybe. Next comes partial versus general equilibrium. But I don't consider partial and general equilibrium as part of the producer theory. It is demand and supply together that determine the equilibrium. So you should be aware of the demand and supply equilibrium. You should be aware about the equilibrium in the different markets also actually. ठीक है, but वो market theory में आ गया, तो इसी को मैं यहाँ पे connect कर देती हूँ. So you should be aware about the equilibrium in perfectly competitive market, equilibrium in monopoly, why monopoly does not have a supply curve, बहुत कुछ है monopoly में, सब कुछ पता होना चाहिए. Learners index, I am just giving you some examples, etc. ठीक है. Then you should be better aware about oligopoly. So you should be aware about the different models in oligopoly. Cournot, Bertrand, Stackelberg, monopolistic competition. ये सब कुछ पता होना जरूरी है. You must be aware of all of this. ठीक है. So better now let us go back and come to the equilibrium. So यहाँ पे how taxes affect the partial equilibrium should also be known. Better next let's talk about general equilibrium. So general equilibrium में you should be aware about how to make the Edgeworth box. Okay, how to find equilibrium under this situation. So what is your contract curve and how to find equilibrium when producer plus consumer is involved. ठीक है, तो एक जब हम ये बनाते हैं ना that this is the PPF, this is the IC and we find the equilibrium, वो equilibrium condition जाननी जरूरी है. ठीक है. Next, let's talk about the returns to scale. So under the returns to scale, you should be aware about what are the return, how to check returns to scale. So how to check returns to scale is very important. That is the first thing that you should be aware about. Then beta, you should also be aware about, how you can go ahead and find what is the law of variable proportion. So that law of variable proportion should also be known to you. And under different states, how does your cost function look? So, when I say that my average cost curve, suppose I tell you that this is my long run average cost curve. So what does this state represent? Is time pe aapka returns to scale kya hai? Is time pe kya hai? Is time pe kya hai? You should also be aware about that. Okay, it'll come forward. Now let's talk about the distribution theories. So distribution theory mein Ricardian, Marx, Kalicki and Calder, only 4 distribution theories are mentioned. So you must be aware of all 4. Now let's talk about the welfare economics. So in welfare economics, you must be aware about what is the first welfare theorem. What is the second welfare theorem? How we draw the case of monopoly in Edgeworth box. Right? Then you should be aware about Arrow's school of thought, Court's theory of school of thought and Sain's school of thought. ठीक है? तो बेटा ये हो गया आपका पेपर 1 का मॉड्यूल 1. पेपर 1 का मॉड्यूल 1 ये हो गया हमारा. अब हम बात करेंगे पेपर 1 के मॉड्यूल 2 की. So when we talk about paper 1 module 2, सबसे पहले जो आता है, let's just see here. So the first thing that comes is national income accounting. So in national income accounting, you should be well aware of all the different types of methods of accounting. So you must be aware about income method, expenditure method, product method. सब कुछ पता होना चाहिए. What is included, what is not included, what is private income, what is personal disposable income. इनके क्या formulas होते हैं? You should be well aware of all of that. Second आता है theory of employment and output. So इस theory of employment and output में you should be aware about classical, neoclassical, Keynes, post-Keynes and business cycles. So let me give you an example. Suppose they ask you what is the difference between classical versus Keynes for the thought of AS curve. How do you distinguish between classical and Keynes? So we know classical says that you will have full employment level, hai na? So how do you distinguish between classical and Keynes for AS curve? That is what can be asked, right? Then they can ask you, for example, example 2, define business cycle. Okay, and link the 4 stages of business cycle, right? So then you have to tell what happens during recession, during inflation. What is, they can ask inflationary gap, deflationary gap, ये सब भी पूछ सकते हैं, ठीक है? Then the third beta is your inflation. They are asking type of inflation. So in this, for example, they can go ahead and they can ask you, let me just create some gap here. So beta, they can, for example, here, they can ask you what is, let's say, cost pull inflation, demand push inflation. Okay, demand inflation, cost inflation. Then they can go ahead and ask you about what are the different issues with inflation. Like, for example, what is the shoe leather problem of inflation, etc. As a kuch bhi question can come in exam. Then they can ask you about the Phillips curve. Now, when we talk about the Phillips curve, they can also ask you about augmented Phillips curve equation, which takes into consideration the theory of expectation, right? So they can ask you about that. Then better, they can also ask you about the long run Phillips curve. Then they can ask you about the Taylor's rule and Lucas critic. So when I say Lucas critic, that means that beta they can also ask you about the adaptive expectation. They can ask you about a rational expectation. And then they can also ask you about the Lucas critic. ठीक है जी? अच्छा, next let's talk about the next thing, which is money and banking. In money and banking, they can ask you about the quantity theory of money. And when I talk about quantity theory of money, they can ask you all forms of quantity theory of money. So for example, one form is MV is equal to PT. Okay. You should be well aware who gave this form. The other form is MV is equal to PY. You should be aware who gave that form. The other is M is equal to KPY, where K is 1 by V. So all these forms, who gave what and what is their significance, you should be, etc. There are multiple, huh? So you should be aware about all of those. Then you should be aware about the neutrality. And when I talk about neutrality, which school of thought talks about neutrality, you should be aware about that also. Okay. Next beta, we have the AD and AS curve. Isme you should be aware about the derivation. So actually isme aisa na chahiye. You should be aware about IAS, LM, AD, AS in charo ki derivation. And then multipliers. So what is the fiscal policy multiplier? What is the monetary policy multiplier? ये भी पता होना चाहिए, ठीक है जी? Then beta you have money multiplier, and finally you have inflation targeting. Okay. So then the next thing that comes is the theories of economic growth, classical, neoclassical, and growth and development. So when I talk about theories, beta you should be aware about all theories. So you should be aware about Solow, Harrod-Domer, क्योंकि neoclassical सब लिख दिया ना उन्होंने, Lewis, etc. I will not mention all here, but you should be well aware about all theories. Okay? You should also be aware between what is the difference between growth and development. ये भी पता होना जरूरी है. The next thing that I want to talk about is international trade. So when it comes to international trade, all theories beta. So जब हम theory की बात करते हैं, Ricardian theory, what is the theory of comparative advantage, absolute advantage. So ये examples पता होने चाहिए कि किस किस theory को आपको पढ़ना जरूरी है. So when I say, so example, comparative advantage, absolute advantage, okay, etc. So there are multiple theories that we have covered, and you should be covering all of those theories. Okay, beta. Next आता है determination of exchange rate. So when I talk about the determination of exchange rate, you should not only be aware of this, you should be aware about fixed, floating, mixed exchange rate, and the most important model, which is the Mundell-Fleming model. So you should be aware about the Mundell-Fleming model also. ठीक है जी. Next comes the impossible trinity. So you should be aware about, I'm giving you this as a test. You have to tell me what this is. So there are three things which cannot be achieved together. One is MP, one is EX. MP is freely following your choice of monetary policy. EX is going ahead and talking about the exchange rate. You have to tell me what is the third one. You have to go ahead and tell me what is the third one. Okay, so you should be well aware of this. But you should not only be aware of this, but you should also be able to understand how to go ahead and how to write this in answers in exam. Okay? So when I say answer in exam, matlab agar suppose they ask you about impossible trinity, then you should be aware that you have to make this triangle also. So autonomous or free monetary policy, fixed exchange rate, and the third one, as you can tell, is the free capital flow. So making this triangle becomes very important. That is the part of presentation that I'm talking about. Okay. So this is there. Okay, beta, come forward now. So now let us continue with what we were doing. So the next thing that you want to go ahead and understand is public finance. Isme all theories of taxation. How do you determine optimal tax? What is public expenditure? And what is the debt management? If you want, in the comment section, I will link you to some theories that I have recorded on YouTube and posted it on YouTube also. So you can go through those theories of taxation also. Like, for example, Wagner's theory. Na? So you can go through that also. It's posted on ArthaPoint's YouTube channel, right? Okay. So now this is all about the first part that we have talked about, beta. This first part that we talked about, this is actually talking about paper 1. Now I will go ahead and I will talk about paper 2. So when it talks about paper 2, let's go below. Okay, paper 2. So when we talk about paper 2, beta, in paper 2, the first thing is quantitative methods in economics. Quantitative methods can be divided in 3 parts. The first one is mathematical methods. The second is statistical methods. And third is econometrics. So 3 part में हम इसको divide कर सकते हैं. This is module 2, paper 1. So paper 1 will be maths, mathematical methods, and quantitative methods actually. And second will be Indian economics. तो अभी हम ये फर्स्ट पेपर की बात कर रहे हैं मॉड्यूल 2 में. पेपर 1 of module 2 and paper 2 of module 2. So mathematical methods mein we have differentiation, integration, set theory, matrices, linear algebra, and linear programming. So isme beta you should be well aware of the different kind of matrices. Just for example here, what is a diagonal matrix? What is an idempotent matrix? What are determinants? What are vectors? What is subspace? What is vector space? सब कुछ जानना जरूरी है. ठीक है. Similarly, when I talk about set theory, you should be aware about what is domain, what is range, what are relations, what are functions. ठीक है. Integration में आना चाहिए. You should be aware about all the type of integration. Differentiation में भी partial differentiation, multivariable differentiation, single variable, so single variable, and multiple variable. So you must be aware about all these concepts. And their economic uses also. Like for example, integration, it can be used to find consumer surplus. Like for example, differentiation, it can be used to go ahead and to do elasticity. So you should be aware about where they can be used also, right? So that's the part. Linear programming bit are very important from exam point of view. Next, we talk about the statistical methods. And when we talk about statistical methods, we have the measure of central tendency, mean, median, mode, then dispersion, variance, standard deviation. Then we have probability. Okay? Isme, for example, the Bayesian formula is very important. Time series and index number. So beta, again, index number is very important. What is Paget's index? What is last pair? Okay? What are the different kind of index, etc. They are also very important. Next, we talk about econometrics. So beta, econometrics mein regression can easily be done from your Gujarati, but and from your graduation also. But what has been additionally added is basically your panel data and time series data. ये बहुत सारे colleges में graduation में नहीं करवाया जाता है. They only focus on cross sectional data, but not on panel data or not on time series data. And this is a new thing for many students. What are the basic applications of AI and ML? And you should be aware about this also. What is artificial intelligence? What is machine learning? In machine learning, what is supervised machine learning? What is unsupervised machine learning? Okay? What are the different clustering techniques? Okay? So you should be aware about those also. The last part that you have, that is on Indian economy beta. So in this, you have fiscal policies. Fiscal policy का अलग-अलग part कि government कहाँ-कहाँ expenditure कर रही है और उसका current trend भी. ठीक है? Then you have monetary policy. So monetary policy में जब हम बात करते हैं, you should be aware about the functions of banks, the function of RBI, what is inflation targeting, and the current trends also. जैसे repo rate change हो रहा है, नहीं हो रहा है, why does repo rate change, what is statutory liquidity ratio, what is cash reserve ratio. So you must be aware about everything. Clear? Next आता है banking and financial sector. So role of banks and the current trends. You should be also aware of any merger or acquisition that has taken place. So think about HDFC. I'm just giving you an example. So you must be aware about all of this also. फिर inflation में trends and drivers, whether inflation is increasing or decreasing. So what causes inflation in the economy? What are the reasons of inflation? And what has been the trend of inflation? कितने % पे inflation रही है? That should be well aware of it. Finally, we have the external sector in which we talk about balance of payment. Current trends are very important in each part, right? So you can also go ahead and read what you have to every year go through the budget and survey. That will give you a lot of information about the trends in these things. Okay, so it is very important to read the latest budgets and surveys. Okay, clear a bit? Now, let us talk about the pattern of this paper till last year. So till last year, the pattern of the paper was that there were 10 questions that were given to you and that you had to answer only 5 of them. So options were given to you, right? Now let us go ahead and ask ourselves how to answer the questions. So first of all, beta, this is a written paper. So believe me or not, but handwriting matters. You cannot write in a way which is not understood by the person who's checking your paper. So handwriting of your paper matters. Presentation matters. So have a look here. Suppose this is a sheet and I've asked you, go ahead and tell me how to write an answer. Again, you can refer to my other videos. I have gone ahead and made some I've given answer as to how to go ahead and practice answer writing. So I've written few answers for UPSC Indian Economic Services. So you can refer to that. So whenever you write any answer, you should be first, whenever you write any answer, you should be first giving an introduction. Then you should be talking about what the question is asking. So if I ask you, how does an augmented Phillips curve look? So you should first talk about what is a Phillips curve. Then you should be talking about exactly what they've asked, augmented Phillips curve. Then you should be giving mathematical equation of augmented Phillips curve. Then you should be giving graph of augmented Phillips curve. And finally, you should be giving conclusion. So the answer that you write matters a lot, and you should know the exact way of presenting your answer. Clear, beta? Next, let's talk about strategy of solving this paper or cracking this paper. So what is DEPR phase 2 strategy? Now, when I talk about DEPR phase 2 strategy, as you have seen, current trends are very important. So you have to read the newspaper, read Economic Times, read EPW, read Financial Times, go ahead and read Budget and Survey. So understanding the trends is very, very important. Second, you should always give your answer as the way I mentioned in pointers with introduction, conclusion, graph, equation, etc. Third, you should write headings and subheadings, right? So for example, if they ask you classical versus Keynes, just make a box and explain the difference between classical and Keynes properly. Practice mock test series. जितने ज़्यादा answer writing practice करोगे, जितने ज़्यादा paper लिखना practice करोगे, that is what is going to go ahead and help you. So you need to go ahead and practice the mock test series also. And understand the wording of the question. So read the question thoroughly. Read in between the lines. Are they asking you to elaborate? Are they asking you to analyze? Are they asking you to discuss? Are they asking you to compare? You should be reading the wording properly and accordingly giving the answer. Is that clear? Okay. The next thing I want to talk about, beta, are the books that you should be referring. So for module 1, module 1, part paper 1, that means for microeconomics, you can refer to these books. My favorite is Varian and Snyder, and these two books are enough for you to practice. So अगर ये दो books कर ली काफी है, बाकी दो करने की जरूरत नहीं है. But these are the 4 suggested books that you have for microeconomics. The second that we want to go through is macroeconomics. So for macroeconomics, you can go through Dornbusch and Blanchard. Both of them are excellent books, and you should know what to read from where. Just for example, that should be clear to you. Just for example, know that when it comes to Phillips curve, when it comes to ISLM, I like Dornbusch. That has more information. But when it comes to understanding wage setting relation, price setting relation, Blanchard is the best book. Okay? So you should know which book to follow for what concept also. Next beta, we have international economics, for which you should be following Krugman, right? And or Salvatore. That's also a good book to follow, right? For econometrics, you should be going for Gujarati, right? For maths, you should be going for Hammond. And for stats, you should be going for DeBoer. Now, many students ask me, ma'am, which book for Indian Eco? Beta, infinite list hai. Ek book se nahi ho paega. Uma Kapila is a good book, but it's not complete. You should be, you see, there's are macro trends. Then they talk about banking sector also. Then they talk about inflation also. So no one book will do justice for your Indian Eco part, and I don't want you to do everything through one book. So you should be focusing on multiple books. ठीक है? एक अलग वीडियो कभी बनाएंगे जिसमें we will discuss कि किस पार्ट को कौन सी बुक से करना अच्छा रहेगा. If you have any other queries, you can always contact Rohit sir. Please write down our number. So ArthaPoint Plus, our number is 83686. 63950. Any doubts you have, anything you want to clarify regarding this exam, you can go ahead and ask us on this number. Okay. As I focus always, my focus is always, koi bhi paper do, you should be going ahead and completing maximum syllabus. Even if you cannot do 100% of the syllabus, always aim at completing 80 to 85% of the course thoroughly. Should be completed. And since this is a written paper, always focus on answer writing skills. That is very important. Even if you know everything, but you don't answer it properly, you don't write it in the right way, it's of no use. So answer writing is also very important. Okay, beta. So any questions that you have, anything anyone would like to ask? Okay, so we will go ahead and end the session for today. And if you have any queries, please note down this number and you can go ahead and ask us anytime.